Welcome everyone to the FAA's webinar waiver series for unmanned aircraft systems. My name is Kevin Morris. I'm an aviation safety inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration working in the Flight Standards Division, and I will be your host for this webinar and the remainder of the series over the summer. So I want to thank you all for joining us here this afternoon on a Tuesday. Many of you are still logging in, so we'll proceed here with the webinar a little bit slowly to give folks a chance to dial in and so they don't miss any of the content. I want to introduce you to the waiver screen that you're looking at through Adobe Connect. And in particular, I want to point out a couple of what Adobe Connect calls pods. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to notice that there is a Q&A pod, and that is where you can type in your questions to have them answered by a group of FAA UAS experts. To the left of that on your screen is the Drone Info Zone Resources pod, and that has information in PDF form that you may download directly to your computer that has a lot of the details, instructions, and guidance that we'll be discussing during today's webinar. So a little bit through the basics. First, with Adobe Connect, if you're new, the audio is going to be through your computer speakers. I did just touch on the Q&A pod. A couple of points with that. If you do have a question for the Q&A pod, it's best to keep your questions general. I want them to stay focused on UAS waivers, but try to make it general, because if we have general questions, then we can answer and reply to everyone so they can see the answer, and it works better for everyone that way. Following the presentation portion today, we are going to have a live question and answer format that follows. And that will be akin to like a radio show, where I will be able to select you. You'll be able to ask your question live on the air to the FAA experts that we have in the room, and hopefully get your question answered. I do want to point out as well that the entire session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind as we move forward. So first off, who are we? Well, certainly we are the Federal Aviation Administration, but we represent the Flight Standards Division. Flight Standards is responsible for ensuring compliance with the regulations, the certification of airmen and aircraft, which includes unmanned aircraft systems. Today, you have access to a dedicated team of UAS experts to help you out. We have representatives from the air traffic side of the FAA. We have folks from the waiver team that does the review of the waivers. We also have folks like myself from the Flight Standards Division to help you answer questions on policy or guidance or rules or any other issue that you might have coming forward. What we want to do is make sure that we're educating you with the information that you need in order to fly safe. We're going to start here with our ongoing digital workshop series. The digital workshop series is going to be driven over the course of the summer to help you get your questions answered by FAA folks. So we will record each of these episodes, and each of these episodes will then be made available at a later date for your viewing. The content is going to be hot topics. So in terms of what we're going to address first are going to be waivers. So we get a lot of people asking us about waivers. In fact, that's one of the biggest questions we get is, where is my waiver? So we want to try to help you folks understand the process behind that and how we want to do this moving forward. Beyond that, we want to get feedback from you folks. We want you to help drive the information that we're presenting to you. So what do you want to know? And that's the type of information that's going to help steer this webinar series after we get through the waiver portion of it. Our objective, safety of the national airspace system, and beyond that, certainly we want to clarify FAA processes as they relate to UAS operations. The key benefit of doing a live webinar like this is that it enables us to have better communications with you, the operator, the folks out in the industry doing this on a day-to-day basis as part of your business. We want you folks to feel that you have a direct connection to the FAA, and one of the ways to do that is this waiver process. So today, specifically, we want to help you folks understand what an operational waiver is, and quite frankly, what it's not. We want to explain the waiver process more clearly. A lot of folks think that the waiver process is mysterious and that it's not easily understandable. We want to kind of help demystify that and work with you on helping you understand the process that your waiver application goes through when you click submit in the Drone Zone portal. And probably one of the most important aspects is we want to answer your questions. We realize that, and a lot of times, it's not easy to get direct access to an FAA inspector or somebody at the FAA to help you out. This is your golden opportunity to have direct access to a variety of experts to help you out. So please, if you have a question, use the Q&A pod, or work with us at the end during the live Q&A, and we'll try to get your questions answered there as well. So let's start at the very beginning. As you folks know, in industry, a lot of terms get thrown around: waiver, authorization, exemption. And unfortunately, some of those terms are used interchangeably, and they mean very, very different things. Today, and what we're going to talk about over the course of this series, are going to be waivers. Waiver is the official document issued by us here at the FAA that will authorize you to fly an aircraft outside the limitations of a regulation, but at the same time ensuring an equivalent level of safety. So that's a waiver. And remember, it's not an airspace authorization. When you're talking or asking questions or discussing this, make sure that you're very clear on the topic of waiver or authorization. So what is an authorization? We term that as an airspace authorization. As we all know, Part 107 requires that you have air traffic authorization to operate in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or surface areas of Class Echo airspace. For UAS, authorizations are issued or processed through one of two ways: our Drone Zone portal or third-party apps that are offering the low altitude authorization and notification capability, often called LANC. But remember, the authorization is your permission to operate in that airspace. So that's great, but what does it really mean for you as the UAS operator? Here's what it means. We're talking about operational waivers today, and that is going to be your authorized method in which you will operate your UAS while deviating from a regulation. If you are talking about an authorization, you're talking about an airspace authorization, and that is your permission to fly in a specified segment of airspace while still following all the rules. So I'm going to keep it on the screen for just a second because it's very important that we understand the difference between the waiver and the authorization. And today we're talking about the operational waivers. In Part 107, we list a number of rules that we allow for people to apply for waivers for. And that is the column that you see on the right. But when we're talking to our buddies out there, when we're just discussing what we want to do, we don't talk in terms of, I want a waiver for a daylight operation. What we talk about is, I want to fly my UAS at night. So this chart here is designed to help you a little bit between what you really want to do and what you're technically asking for. So you want to fly your UAS at night? What you're going to apply for is a waiver for the daylight operation. In Part 107, in addition to the rules that we list that allow for you to apply a waiver towards, we give you some policy requirements. We state in the rule that your waiver must include a complete description of your proposed operation and justification that demonstrates to us that you will fly your UAS safely while deviating from the rule. I want you to take away two key words from this slide: complete and justification, because we're going to come back to that a little bit later here when we talk about the process and how it works through the waiver team in their review. We need a complete description of your operation, and we need the justification of your safety risks assessment. The waiver policy requirements also state that the administrator, and that's one of the terms that we use to reference the FAA, the administrator may issue a certificate of waiver. So while we certainly list rules in Part 107 that are available for waivers, they're not guaranteed. The administrator may issue a certificate of waiver. Well, how do you get that waiver from the FAA? The burden is upon you, the applicant, to show us that your UAS operation will be safely conducted under the terms of that waiver. So again, the burden is on the applicant to show us how you're going to conduct that operation safely under the terms of the waiver. And keep in mind, if you look at the last bullet point on the screen there, just because you list safety mitigation steps 1 through 10 on your waiver application doesn't mean that the administrator may prescribe rules 11, 12, and 13 for you. So the administrator does have the authority to prescribe additional limitations on your operation through your application for a waiver. So remember, waivers are not guaranteed. They're not your right as an operator. They're certainly not automatic, and they are not permanent. So when we're applying for a waiver, we need to remember these 4 bullet points on there. And when we apply, we need to make sure we have a complete, and justified description of what we want to do. So how does the process work? This is how the process works. What you're seeing on your screen right now is our process for the waiver applications, and it starts with you, the applicant. When you go into our FAA dronezone.faa.gov account is where you will apply for your waiver. You will have access to the waiver safety explanation guidelines, and you will submit your application through that web portal. Once you submit your request, you will receive a reference number assigned to your Drone Zone account, and that will be how you were able to check on the status of your waiver. When we receive your waiver application through that Drone Zone portal, it's first assigned to an analyst, and what they do is they look at it for the type of rule that you're requesting relief from, and they look at it for how complex your operational proposal is, or what's sometimes called CONOPS. We take a look at that, and then it's assigned to a waiver team specialist, and that goes into the evaluation process. When we're looking at your waiver application, we're looking for your safety analysis, we review all the information, and at times we may request additional information from you. We call that a request for information, or RFI. A tip: if you receive an RFI from the FAA, respond to it as quickly as possible. RFIs that go unanswered for more than 30 days delay the waiver process significantly. So please be as responsive as you can if you receive a request for additional information. Once we finish our evaluation, it goes to management review, where we have a quality control group to make sure that we are approving waivers appropriately and the same way across the board. And then it goes to the decisional process. If we approve your waiver, that waiver is published on our website for the public to see. If your waiver happens to be denied, we are sending that information back to you with some information to help you with understanding how that waiver was denied. This whole process that you're looking at on the screen here takes an average of about 30 days from the time you submit to the time that a decision is made. Of course, there are some variances in there. The complexity of your waiver, how quickly you respond to an RFI, that can lengthen or shorten the process. But on average, we're processing waivers in about 30 days. Some key points to remember. When you're going to submit an application for a waiver, submit that application as quickly as possible ahead of time. We request 90 days prior. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, you just told me it only takes 30 days to approve a waiver. That is certainly our average, but we want you to understand that we sometimes need longer than 30 days to approve a waiver, depending on its complexity or where it happens to be operating from. So 90 days in advance ensures you have enough lead time with the FAA to have your waiver reviewed and a decision made. Again, it may take longer than 30 days average. It may take shorter. It just depends on the complexity of your waiver that you're using, that you're applying for. So when you do get a waiver, the validity of that waiver is going to be valid any time between 1 day and up to 4 years. Again, that time window is pretty big, but it really depends on what you're requesting to be waived and where you're intending to operate. As most of you know, waiver applications are submitted through one spot, and that is our FAA Drone Zone portal. And the website is right at the top there, FAA dronezone.faa.gov. You're going to need to log in and have an account registered under Part 107 to apply for a waiver. What happens sometimes is folks will log in and they'll register under Part 336 or Section 336, and then they will never see the waiver portion of our Drone Zone account. You need to register under Part 107 to see that waiver application portal. But once you register, you can come and start applying for your waiver. And this is a little bit of a screenshot of what it may look like. Our Drone Zone portal is your centralized hub for small UAS operations. What we just mentioned, you can apply for waivers there. You can apply for airspace authorizations there that don't fall underneath the LANCE rollout plan that we're doing right now. It's where you register your small UAS, so that would be under either Part 107 or Part 101, Section 336. If you have an accident with your UAS under Part 107 and it meets the reporting criteria, our Drone Zone portal is also where you will report your accident. And most importantly, we have guidance. And many people do not realize this, but there is guidance in our Drone Zone portal, and it's extremely important when you're applying for a waiver. The guidance that we have available for you are step-by-step application process guidance, how to apply for an operational waiver, and almost most importantly is the Waiver Safety Explanation Guidelines, WSEG or WSEG is sometimes as it's referred to. The Waiver Safety Explanation Guidelines are questions that we have to assist you in applying for a waiver. It's not meant to be an all-inclusive list. It's not going to address every possible situation that you may encounter with your proposed area of operation. If you have a very complex operation proposal or a complex waiver request, certainly the WSEG will help you start, but it's not going to be the end-all be-all of waiver application, hazard identification, or risk mitigation strategies that you may need to employ. So what does the WSEG do for you? It gives you a starting point. It gives you some questions based on the type of waiver you are seeking to help get you moving along the path to do a risk assessment, to help us understand what you intend to do and how you intend to mitigate the risks in your operation. And it's an extremely important document. So you should at least have that as your starting point when you begin the waiver application process. Second most important are instructions. And you'd be surprised at how many people just don't simply read the instructions. So why would the instructions be so important? Well, they're going to answer questions for you such as, what is a responsible person? When the waiver application requests that I put in a responsible person, what does that mean? That's going to be in the application instructions. Or if you're wondering, how specific do I need to be with my proposed location? Do I need to give a latitude, longitude, and a radius of let's say half a mile? Or can I say I want to be able to do this across the entire United States? The answers to that will be the instructions. Or can I request a waiver for 5 years? Again, the answers for that will be in the instructions. When you move beyond that and you've read the documents and the guidance, you're ready to start the waiver application process. And the first window you're going to get to is this one you're looking at the screen right now. You need to understand what you are requesting because it's very, very important for the process, especially if you're confusing things like authorization and waiver or airspace waiver. It will slow down, delay, and probably frustrate you. Typically, when we're talking about waivers, the vast majority of you are wanting to request an operational waiver. That's the first radio button you see on the screen there, and that's the one that we're going to focus on, operational waivers. So make sure you are selecting the correct radio button here in the step before we get to step 1 in the waiver application. Step 1 in the waiver application is the acknowledgement. That's where you're going to put in your operational title, which will help you reference the document later. You're going to identify the responsible party, you're going to identify the pilot, and you may identify an organization. So what do we mean by organization? We say that Drone Zone is organization specific, meaning that each Drone Zone account is generally issued one waiver per regulation, or each Drone Zone, whether it's an individual account or an organization account, generally are issued one waiver per regulation. But I want to break that down a little bit for you guys because typically we do not issue more than one waiver per regulation. However, if you look at the sub-bullet points there, you can see the second bullet point, we may need to issue more than one waiver per regulation per Drone Zone account, for example, for altitude. If you're requesting an altitude limitation, you want to fly above 400 feet, that would be a waiver request that's going to be specific to a location. But conversely, if you're looking to fly at night and you're requesting a daylight waiver, you're not going to be issued multiple daylight waivers because generally speaking, daylight waivers are not site specific. So if you're an organization and you've got 5 or 6 or 10 remote pilots that are working for your company, you do not need to apply for individual applications for individual people. If those remote pilots can meet all the requirements of your waiver for your organization, they may operate underneath that waiver. Again, make sure that you're in compliance with all the conditions and limitations in your waiver when that happens. But the takeaway is you don't need to make 5 daylight waiver applications for the 5 remote pilots at your company. You can make 1 daylight waiver application. So try and remember this. when you use the drone zone account to apply, do not use it to apply for multiple organizations. One drone zone account, one individual, or one drone zone account, one organization. We don't want people applying for multiple waivers for different individuals under one account. And if you happen to be in the business of assisting people with their waiver applications, please remember that each applicant will need their own account. Again, one drone zone account per individual or one drone zone account for an organization. Once you move past step 1, you get into step 2, and step 2 is very, very important. That's the actual waiver application portal process. That's going to help us understand where you want to fly, what you want to do, all those types of things. You're going to select the regulation that you want to be waived in step 2. And the waiver safety explanation can be entered there, or you have an opportunity to include an attachment in step 4, and I'll touch on that here in a little bit. If you choose to enter your justification and waiver safety explanation in step 2, be advised that you would be limited to 15,000 characters in the window that appears. So you can certainly cut and paste that out of a document if you want, but we're finding most people now would prefer to upload an attachment. So if that's the case, you may do that in step 4. But back to step 2 for now. That's where you're going to also put in your operational parameters, and if you have existing waivers, you would enter that information as well in step 2. Step 3 is details about your drone. Now in step 3, there is not a requirement, meaning that you can submit an application without identifying a drone. You can also select any drone that you have registered through the FAA, our drone zone portal, or you may add a drone that you have not registered previously that you're going to use, keeping in mind it would need to be registered prior to flight, but you're not required to enter any unmanned aircraft system information. However, certain waiver requests are going to need information about your unmanned aircraft system. In particular, operations over people, beyond visual line of sight, or altitude are going to require that you put in a small unmanned aircraft system identified in there. And the reason is those particular waivers utilize the technology that's available in the make and model of small unmanned aircraft system that you're operating as part of the risk mitigation. So for ops over people, beyond visual line of sight, or altitude waivers, you will need to put in your UAS information because we want to know what type of equipment you're using and how that equipment is going to help ensure the safety of the national airspace system. Now remember, we're at step 4, and in step 4, you may upload your attachment where you can include your complete justification. This is also a time for you to make sure that everything is correct in your application, and please do take the time to scroll down and read the information that you've submitted. Make sure it's accurate because that will save a lot of delays in the long run. But if you want to use the attachment, I want to talk about that a little bit. You can upload up to 5 attachments, each having about 20 megs worth of data in it. And for example, if you wanted to upload some PDFs because you've written all this out, you've got a whole ops manual that you want to upload, that's great. We want to see that information. One of the best things you can do is before you upload that information, make sure things are bookmarked so that the waiver application review group can take a look at the bookmarks you have and immediately identify where you describe the lighting that's on your unmanned aircraft system, or where you describe some of the capabilities of the geofencing that you want to use. If that information is bookmarked, it really speeds up the process for the waiver team to do that review. Finally, you get to step 5. Step 5 is your confirmation. It's when you're going to get your tracking number issued, and it will show you on your Drone Zone account that you have one application under review, and that would be the last step in the process. Another tip here though, don't submit your waiver if it's not complete. Don't submit it thinking, well, I've got most of my stuff there, I'm pretty happy with it, but I need to describe the geofencing capabilities of my UAS, or I need to describe the lights in more detail, but I don't have time to do that today. I want to get my request in, and I'll just update it later. Do not submit your waiver application unless it's 100% complete. That is key to helping the process move along smoothly for you. So on our end, what do we see as some of the biggest mistakes or errors that are made? Believe it or not, Number one is people are not reading the instructions for the waiver application. Secondly, we're not fully addressing the waiver safety explanation guideline questions. So a simple yes or no is not what we're looking for when we're posting those questions for you to answer in your waiver application. We want a complete, remember that word, and we need the justification of that operation. So a complete description and justification moving forward. Finally, one of the things that we have a lot of concern with is that folks are not providing a method with sufficient detail describing how risk is mitigated. And if you're reading that last bullet point thinking, there's words in there that are just foreign to me, I'm not used to dealing with them, I don't know what this guy is talking about, there's good news for you. Our very next webinar series is going to be all about risk assessment, hazard identification, mitigating those risks in terms of applying for a waiver. So that's coming up next. But that is still one of the big issues that we have when people are submitting their waiver applications. There are resources available to you that are free, provided by us to help you folks out. And one of the best resources available right now is our FAA UAS website. You can get to that website by visiting www.faa.gov/UAS. And it's really your one-stop shop for all UAS information and resources. Pretty much everything you may need to know or want to know or maybe heard about is going to be on that website. What we've been talking about mostly today is our Drone Zone portal. And our Drone Zone portal is, again, where you're going to do your registration of your UAS, where you apply for your waiver or airspace authorization if LANCE is not effective in your area yet. And that web address is faadronezone.faa.gov. But both of those websites on the screen now are excellent tools to help you out with your waiver application process. So I want to touch a little bit on the scheduled events here as we move forward. We completed the Where's My Waiver here today on June 19th. It'll be Risky Business, followed by Just the Facts, where we're going to talk about specifically what information should we be looking for in the waiver application. And then we're going to get into actual waivable rules and trying to address, starting with the most common requested waiver, which is the daylight waiver. So we're going to do a two-part series on the dark night, where we're going to discuss the waiver safety explanation guidelines and move through that process, specifically focusing on people that want to fly at night that are requesting a daylight waiver. We'll move into the good and the bad and the ugly, which will be a series on understanding what we're seeing on our end, what works real well, what has not worked really well, and try to help you folks see what we're seeing to understand what we need from you. We're going to talk about beyond visual line of sight waivers, altitude restriction waivers, and finally we finish up with operations over people on September 18th. So I want to thank you for joining us here today. Please don't go anywhere. The live Q&A session will follow this. I know we had a little bit of a technical glitch at the beginning. I apologize for that, but hopefully we found this information very useful and everybody could see me and hear me as we move forward. I'm going to take a short couple-minute break here, and when we come back, we'll start the live Q&A session. So again, thank you folks for joining. Please don't go anywhere. We're just taking a short break, and we'll go ahead with the live Q&A. Thanks again. All right, greetings everyone. We're back. Time to start up our live Q&A session. But before we get going, I want to do a little bit of a brief on how this is going to work and how it's set up. First of all, everyone here is logged in, and you have microphones disabled right now automatically by Adobe Connect. And what I'm going to do is, if you have a question, I will ask that you raise your hand. And if you read the materials that were distributed beforehand during registration, you'll see that. And I'm going to look for people that have their hands raised, and I will call out your name, similar to like a radio show. I say, okay, you're on the air with your question. Before I get to that point, though, I want to make sure we're all aware of a couple things. One, you probably don't see your microphone access at the top on the gray bar for Adobe Connect. When I enable you, you're going to want to make sure that your microphone is no longer muted. That way you can ask the questions. If your speaker volume is up really, really loudly on your computer, it's going to create a looping feedback as well. So if you have a question you want answered, please try to dial down your computer speakers a little bit before you ask that question. When I call your name and we look at the question and bring you up, please remember that this is live on the air. Please remember our audience, keep it professional. And what we're going to do today is we're going to address questions related to operational waivers. So if you have questions on airspace authorizations or questions because you want an airspace waiver or something not related to unmanned aircraft system operational waivers, I ask that you please hold that question for later, or since we've been live tweeting the event, you may ask that question via Twitter, hashtag drone question to @FAA News. So if it's a question that either you didn't answer you're asking the Q&A pod, if it's a question that you didn't get a chance to ask live during the live Q&A, you may ask that question through our live Twitter feed that's happening now as well. So what I'll do here is make sure that everybody's understanding of how to raise their hand. If you look at the top of your screen or whatever device you happen to be using, there is a little person with the hand raised. You can click on that hand person and your hand will go up. And then what I'll do is I'll scroll through and try to find some people that have their hands raised, and we can ask, you can ask your questions and we can try to answer them. So giving this a try, this is sort of a trial run with you guys, so I appreciate the help and the effort on this one. The first question we have is coming in from Skyladder Drones. So I've enabled your microphone. Skyladder Drones, go ahead with your question. Again, make sure that the microphone is enabled on your computer. I'll make sure that I've got volume up here so I can hear you. Well, I'm not getting any audio here from Skyladder Drones. I'll try to keep you guys in mind. I'm going to disable that. We'll find the next person that has their hand raised here and ask the question. Paul Stavanger, I hope I pronounced that name right. Paul, I'm going to go ahead and enable your microphone, make sure it is no longer on mute, and go ahead with your question. I'm not hearing you, Paul. You
can you hear me now?
Oh, I've got you now loud and clear, Paul. Thank you. Go ahead with your question. Welcome.
All right, great. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you. So I'm new. I just received my Part 107 probably three weeks ago, and I'm starting up a new business. I've had an opportunity a couple of times to do some work, do some aerial photography in our area. However, almost the entire area where I live is covered by Class Charlie airspace from the surface up. And my question is regarding to airspace authorizations. Can I ask for a blanket Class Charlie airspace authorization for a period of, say, 6 months?
Okay, great question. I'm going to disable your mic there, Paul. Thank you so much. Granted, that is an airspace question, so here's what I'd like you to do, because I am not the airspace authorization expert. But good news for you, Paul, we do have an air traffic expert available as part of our panel in the background helping out today. If you wouldn't mind taking that question and typing it into the Q&A pod, and they will look for it right away and try to get your answer back as quickly as possible regarding your Class Charlie airspace authorization question. So again, thank you for that question. I really do appreciate it. Moving on to the next one, I'm going to go ahead and enable a microphone on Joshua Goodrich. Go ahead, sir. You are on the air. Again, take a look at the top of your screen there just to make sure that you've got your microphone unmuted now. You should have a green microphone.
Can you hear me now?
I've got you loud and clear, Joshua. Go ahead.
So for the safety mitigation in describing a waiver, say altitude or any number of other things, one of them would seem like the ability to communicate with ATC effectively if you're in an area near it. Has the FAA and the FCC come out with whether or not we need a ground station license, or how do we mitigate that risk when technically you've got an issue with contacting ATC?
All right, great.
In an effective, efficient manner, because you technically can't call them if you're operating the drone, because that's against the regulation.
Okay, a great question, Joshua. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on mute there. I'm going to also ask you to put that question specifically regarding the FCC licensure of a handheld radio or something of that nature for your operation. Please put that again into the Q&A pod, and I'm going to have we may not have the right person in the room to answer the FCC portion of it, but we will certainly get back to your question there. I do want to address one portion of that question, in that if you're operating that area and you want to be able to use communications with air traffic, whether that's a telephone call or something like that, that may be something that you could employ through a visual observer or another assistant for you that's on site working with your operation. So certainly you could put that as a safety mitigation and say that, hey, look, at one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to have somebody right next to me who's going to have a direct phone line to the tower. If something, I need to talk to them or something goes wrong, I can reach them immediately. I'm going to still operate the drone. My primary job is to fly it. I am the remote pilot, but my assistant is going to help out contacting the tower. I think that would be a great safety mitigation depending on what you're looking for. But the specificities of whether or not FCC licenses and handheld radios and things like that, I'm going to have to defer that question. Please put it into the Q&A pod so that we can get it answered for you. So thank you. That was a great question. And we do have a few more hand raised. I'm going to go with Jade Brewer. Go ahead, sir. You are on the air. Again, you may need to go, Jade, to the top of the Adobe Connect screen there and enable your microphone.
Am I heard now?
Yes, Jade. I apologize. I said sir, but yes, ma'am, you are on the air.
All right. Mine is regarding waivers for flights over people. I was wondering if the FAA is planning on granting more waivers, and what are some examples of safety solutions accepted by the FAA for flight over people?
Great question. Thank you, Jade. I'm going to go ahead and disable your microphone. We have issued waivers for operations over people, and as I said, anytime we approve a waiver, that waiver is available on our website. So if you want to take a look at what the waiver looks like for a grant of operations over people, you can find it there. One of the challenges we have with operating over people is the technology of the UAS. If you remember earlier in the presentation, I talked about, well, you don't need to put in your UAS during the application process, except if you're applying for beyond visual line of sight, ops over people, or altitude. And why do we need that? Because your UAS, clearly, if you're going to fly it over people, is extremely important that you tell us about it. We want to know what size is it, what type of information do you have on it when it hits things, and those types of things. So we are not looking to reject ops over people waiver applications. We want to work with you folks to get this industry moving forward, but that is certainly one of the tougher waivers to receive, simply because the demand on the applicant to provide the safety mitigations is so high. And that's definitely one of the things we're going to be talking about towards the end of this waiver series when we discuss specifically operating over people. But again, if you do want to see a waiver that has been approved, they are on the website. You can just go ahead and look for the rule that for the ops over people rule, and you can find that waiver there. So thank you for that question. Another question coming in from Christopher Lum. I'm going to go ahead and enable your microphone, Christopher. And if you would make sure that you're off mute at the top, you're on the air, sir.
Oh, hi, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Christopher. How are you doing?
Well, great. Thank you so much for putting this together. And I guess my question is directly related to Jade's and what you just answered. So you mentioned that you can find the waiver on the website, and I've definitely seen that, but it looks like it is just the FAA's response granting the waiver. It's not the actual body of text that the original applicant put together describing their ConOps and what their risk mitigation and things like that are. And I believe someone in the pod answered that is not publicly available, but is that releasable if we were to try to contact the FAA? Like, would we be able to understand the ConOps and how someone was able to successfully obtain a specific waiver?
All right, disabled your mic. Chris, again, great question coming up. And you're absolutely right. The waivers that we post on our website are the actual certificates of waiver. They're the granted waiver that we've given. We don't publish the application that was submitted along with that. We were scheduled to have representatives from legal counsel in the room, and that, quite frankly, would be a great question for them. So if you wouldn't mind, and I don't mean to punt these questions to you guys and make you do the Q&A pod, but I want to make sure that the answers you guys get are 100% correct. So with that particular question, with gathering information which may contain personal identifiable information or sensitive information, that question I want answered by the expert related to that topic. So please do put that question into the Q&A pod. So a great question, and I'm glad you asked because you brought up a great point in that, yes, the applications that we post on our website, I shouldn't even call them applications, they're the certificate of waivers that we issue, so they're not the applications. So again, thank you, Christopher. Looks like we have another question coming in from Ian Murray. Ian, go ahead, you are on the air.
Yeah, as someone who flew under a 333 exemption previously and had a UAS registered with an N number, does it have to be re-registered through the portal to, I guess, be attached to a waiver request?
That's a good question. For that one, I'm not exactly sure if we're going to make you re-register that. My inclination would be that your N number registration is still valid. Usually registrations are valid for 3 years. I would say that after that registration has expired, you would need to register it through the portal and obtain a new number. But to get an official straightaway answer on that one with no question marks at the end, put that one in the Q&A pod too. I know I'm telling you, folks, that there's these questions are going into the Q&A pod. Rest assured that we are going to look at every single question you folks put in there. So whether you asked it during the presentation portion of the webinar, or whether you're keying it in there now, or you're asking the question to me and I'm sort of deflecting the question because I think I have a better expert to answer the question than me, every one of those questions will be answered, and we will take all those Q&A questions and we will post them to the website so that you folks can see all the questions that were asked. We'll de-identify them, of course, but you will see the questions and you will see the answers asked. So even though I'm telling you, please put that in the Q&A pod, I'm not telling you to put it in there because we're never going to get to it. We're absolutely going to get to it, and that's why I'm asking you to put it in there. So thank you for that question. Any more folks with questions? And again, if you have a question you want to ask, please just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll bring you live on the air. Don't be afraid. We're a bunch of good people, and we're really trying to help you folks out. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand, and we'll try to get to you. Okay, one person that has their hand raised right now, and I apologize, you don't have a last name, but Michael, you are on the air. And Michael, you may need to unmute your mic at the top of the screen there, the little green icon, just make sure it's unmuted. Couple more chances here, Michael, to get your microphone unmuted. Okay, a little bit of issues there, so we'll move on to a couple other folks. Next one up is Paul Swigert, and I hope I get that name right. Paul, I've got you unmuted. Paul, make sure that your microphone at the top of the screen is not muted, that you've got a good solid green indicator at the top of your Adobe Connect window. Again, folks, when I enable your microphones, it doesn't necessarily unmute you. If you happen to have your microphones muted, you would have to unmute yourself in order to ask the question. So, Paul, were you able to get your audio issue there taken care of? Oh, sounds like we'll move on here to the next folks. Josh Goodrich, I'm enabling your microphone. Make sure you are off mute and go ahead with your question.
So, a question for beyond line of sight. What are, and I know we'll probably cover this later, but what are some ways you could mitigate the risk for beyond line of sight to get a waiver approved? Say I'm in a rural area and doing agricultural drone surveying, whatever you want to call it, and I want to get to a couple 100-acre field, and I don't want to have to truck back there on an ATV or something.
All right, great question. Thanks, Josh. One of the issues, and you're right, we are going to touch on this in one of our upcoming series. Believe it or not, we don't get a tremendous amount of requests right now for beyond visual line of sight. Our number one request is for the daylight waiver. Everybody wants to fly at night, which is why we're tackling that one coming up here first in depth after we get through some of the risk assessment. But the beyond visual line of sight is a very technology-driven waiver application. There's going to be a lot of information that will have to be in there to show us that your UAS has the ability to sense and avoid or deconflict with other traffics, airborne and land-based, when you don't have eyes on your aircraft. And so, again, while it's not something that's impossible to get, it's a very technical waiver application, in particular because we look very closely at the capabilities of the specific UAS that you want to use. So anything you can do to show us that your UAS has a capability for sense and avoid or to deconflict with traffic automatically certainly will go a long way. We are going to touch on a lot of that in the upcoming waiver there for the beyond visual line of sight. But keep in mind, the beyond visual line of sight, much like the ops over people, has to do with a lot of technology-based equipment that your UAS has, and that's what makes it challenging to apply for that type of waiver. So thank you again for that question. We have another question coming in from Lee Larkins. I'm going to go ahead and enable your microphone, Lee. If you would just make sure that your microphone is off mute, and go ahead with your question. Again, you may need to look at the top of the screen, Lee, and just...
Hello?
Yep, I've got you now, Lee. Go ahead.
If we wanted a Class D or C airport to become a part of the LANC system, is there any information we can provide to that airport, or should we just be patient and wait?
I'm going to throw a question right back to you here, Lee. Is that Class Charlie or Delta Airport, is it a contract tower or a non-FAA tower?
I would assume it would be a part of the FAA.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to answer your question. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I'm not sure.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question there, Lee. I'm going to answer it in two parts. If it's an FAA tower, it will be rolled into LANC as part of our nationwide rollout. And right now, we're looking at all airports in the United States to be into LANC by mid-September. If you go to our faa.gov/UAS website, you can find information on LANC, and you can actually see a map. It's a sort of a moving map that shows you the different rollouts and when they're planned to happen in different waves with the LANC program. Right now, we're looking at the second part of the question answer I have for you is that we're looking at the contract towers and non-FAA towers. They're not necessarily going to be in that first rollout of LANC. We're looking at the FAA federal control towers. So most likely, if it's a Class Charlie airport, that's going to be an FAA tower. And if you want to know when that's going to be incorporated into LANC, you can go to our website again and just search for LANC, and you'll see a map, and it'll show you when that comes up. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking. A couple more questions, then we may be out of time. I'm going to go ahead and go with Jeremy Raybuck. I apologize if I messed up your last name, Jeremy, but go ahead. You are live on the air, sir. I'm not getting any audio from you, Jeremy. I apologize. I see that the speaker is active, but for some reason I'm not picking up audio. Make sure you're not muted there at the top and you've got a green microphone.
Can you hear me now?
I've got you loud and clear, Jeremy. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, is there a separate license for flying over a national park?
Great, thanks for that question. And the question that was asked was a little bit weak coming through on the audio, so I'll repeat it. Is there a separate license for flying over a national park? The answer would be from the FAA, no. When you have a remote pilot certificate issued under Part 107, that is your authorization to operate under Part 107 in compliance with the rules. As what Jeremy's touching on a little bit is that many national parks do not allow UAS operations in their areas or from their property. That then gets into permits needed from the national park system. So while there's not a separate license issued by the FAA, if you wanted to operate in a national park, I would ask that you contact that national park directly and talk to them about what you want to do and see if that is an option available to you for flying under Part 107. Great question. I'm going to pull one more up here, and then we're getting close to time, and I want to wrap up. So Kyle Moulton, looks like out of Cincinnati. Your microphone is enabled. Kyle, go ahead with your question.
Yes. The question I have is in regards to some of the questions that are asked in the frequently asked questions for your application process. If you answer a majority of those satisfactorily, what percentage of the what percentage actually gets approved through that process?
And when you're talking about, and I got to throw a question back to you here, Kyle, but when you're talking about the frequently asked questions, are you referencing the waiver safety explanation guidelines?
Yes, the guidelines and breaking down each request, what you were specifically looking for.
Great. Thanks for the question. I don't know that I have a specific percentage, like a pass rate for people that answer the waiver safety explanation guidelines. I will say that if you go through an application, for example, and I apologize, I'm going to keep touching on it because it's the number one request, but you want a daylight waiver. And you go into the waiver safety explanation guidelines and you incorporate those questions into your application, and you provide a complete description of your operation and justification for each question or any of the subparts that go through. I would say you're off to an excellent start in your waiver application. Again, the waiver safety explanation guidelines are not a complete end-all be-all of what you need to do with the waiver, because everybody's operation is unique, everybody's area of operation is unique, and so your waiver application is unique. But I would say the vast majority of folks, if they would just read the waiver safety explanation guidelines and provide that information to us, are off to an excellent start and would probably get a request for information rather than maybe a flat-out denial. So the WSEG is a great place for you to start, and while I don't have the percentages, I would bet that it's a pretty high percentage for people that use the waiver safety explanation guidelines or read the instructions and incorporate that in their application, moving it forward. So excellent question. Thank you. Now we do have time for one more. I'm going to try it again. Michael, it's just Michael is the name only. I don't have a last name on there, but I'm going to try to enable your microphone one more time there, Michael. Go ahead with your question. And it's not working, so I will take one more. Mike Spissinger, if I pronounce that last name correctly, go ahead. Your microphone is enabled, and just make sure you're off mute. Again, check right at the top there. You got a green microphone, and it's off mute there, Mike. Well, I got you right at the end. I'm going to go ahead and enable your microphone once more, Mike.
Now,
I've got you loud and clear, Mike. Go ahead.
all right. Hey, we have requested some time ago in October of last year a waiver for flights in a Class D area at the time. Since then, I guess the legislation has changed so that needed to be an authorization. We still have not heard anything back from that request some time ago. Is there a way to convert that request that's already there, or is that just completely out of our hands? Because I'm worried if we file another one now for the similar thing, then we're going to have a waiver and authorization kind of going together and working against ourselves.
Yep, great question. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to punt on that one just a little bit because it gets into some really technical air traffic stuff and whether or not an existing airspace waiver application can be converted into that. So I don't want to answer that and give you some bad information. So I'm going to ask you to put that one in the Q&A pod so we can have our air traffic specialist that's available as part of our expert panel here answer that question. So we're about at looks like 2 p.m. Eastern time right now. And so that wraps up this series for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really hope that today was beneficial for you folks. We're going to be repeating this roughly every 2 weeks in terms of bringing in a new topic to help you folks with the waiver application process. And please, if you have some feedback, good feedback, negative feedback, we would like it all. Please provide that information to us. You can even type it in the Q&A pod if you'd like, if that's the only method to get it to us. But certainly, we are here trying to help you. The FAA is open for business. We want to work with you folks in industry and move this waiver application process forward so it's more understood, it works better for you folks, and you guys can go out there and do what you do best in operating UAS safely in the national aerospace system. So on behalf of the FAA, again, my name is Kevin Morris. I thank you for joining us. It's been my pleasure to talk with some of you, and I look forward to seeing you again in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.